everyone. Today we have a mix of people who are hoping to adopt, all the way from people who are just thinking about adoption and beginning their research to people who are actively waiting, and I know we even have some people on here today who are actively matched and waiting for baby to be born. So thank you for joining us today for Lifetime's Adoption webinar, all about what to expect when your baby arrives. My name is Libby Denniston. Joining me today as my co-hosts are Linda Rotz and Kim King, and we all have different roles here at Lifetime. Each of us have probably worked through every role at Lifetime, or almost every role, but I'm excited because we had Linda on a couple months ago to talk about her expertise with respect to homesteads, and feedback through the last couple months of webinars. We've had people asking a lot of questions about what happens when you finalize your adoption, what happens at the hospital, when does the attorney get involved, and so we thought, let's just collect those questions, and instead of trying to do a whole adoption story from beginning to end, let's just focus on what happens at the end of your adoption story. So Linda is speaking here today from many years of experience working in adoption, period. She's been a social worker. She's been with Lifetime a few years, and she works one-on-one with birth mothers and adoptive parents, but also with attorneys, home study providers, and everyone in between who is helping to complete your adoption. So we will just be able to pick her brain and sort of get an idea. One of the things that we want to make sure that you understand today is that Lifetime works with people across the U.S. So every state may have slightly varied adoption laws, all the way down from how soon can a birth mother sign after her baby's born to how long does it take to finalize the adoption where I live. Some of those questions might be a little bit more specific to you, and it's okay to have those questions, and we encourage them, but we also don't want you to feel frustrated if we can't get too deep into a specific because of where you are, because we're trying to cover more of a general what to expect, more of an average. So if you have questions that are related more specifically to your adoption goals or your adoption progress, just remember you can reach out to us. If you're working with a coordinator at Lifetime, let her know. Say, what is your experience with families who live where I live, or what have other families gone through? And tell her, email her, or set up a time to talk by phone if you know it's going to take a little time to explain. If you don't yet have a coordinator at Lifetime and you're just starting to explore Lifetime's program, remember that you can reach out to us. Our general email is adopt@lifetimeadoption.com. Any of you can always dial 1-800-923-6784 and talk with someone during the day, get answers to your questions. And what I love about our team too is that, if you start with the person who answers the phone, she's going to make sure that you get to the person who knows the answer, and if that person needs more information, then she'll go to the next person who knows the answer. So you will definitely find what you need to get you on the next step towards that baby you're dreaming of in your adoption story. So Kim, if families are just beginning to research Lifetime, what is the best first step for them to help us learn about them?
Well, first of all, kudos to you for attending our webinar. No matter where you are in the process, the fact that you're here today, Libby always says, is a great step. We've noticed that people who attend webinars have a much smoother time in the process. It's just that constant flow of understanding what's going on behind the scenes and more tips, than what we can really put on the website. More conversation, more hypothetical scenarios that your brain can kind of work through no matter where you are in your process. So kudos to you for being here. If you are brand new to Lifetime, the very first thing to do I would recommend is filling out our application right there on the website at lifetimeadoption.com/apply, APPLY. So that's lifetimeadoption.com/apply. And once you submit your application, If you check in your email, you will be automatically sent some information about Lifetime right off the bat. It's automated. And then once we're able to start processing your application, which would be either that day or the following business day, you'll receive a personalized email from our applications coordinator. From there, it generally takes about 1 to 5 business days to have a response or feedback or maybe even more questions about your application. And, we'll meet you where you are, take it case by case, and explore further as we're able. So that would be the first thing to do, is just fill out the application without fear or hesitation, because you're not obligating yourselves. We're not obligating ourselves. It's just opening the conversation for mutual exploration and enabling us to answer your questions based on your specific circumstances and adoption needs too.
Mm-hmm. So we already have questions coming in, which I love seeing. I think it's exciting. I don't know, one of the reasons I'm so encouraged to see the big turnout today is because it really just reminds us that it's so important to think about that end goal when it comes to your adoption dream. It's not just about the paperwork to get started. It's not just about everything it takes to even get to the paperwork to get started. And then it's not even just about being chosen by a birth mother or being offered an opportunity to adopt. And it's not even just about saying yes. It's also about every little thing that happens after that. And that is a huge passion of Lifetimes, is to make sure that you don't feel like you are walking through it alone or in the dark or confused, or that you feel like you don't have the answers or the resources or the support. And so today we get to talk about some of those sensitive moments and then some of the logistics and just everything in between that happens once you hear baby is born or your child, child is available, you need to coordinate a meeting. We had a great question here that said, how does this compare when you have an older baby or a sibling group? So some of this may tie in together well with that. Primarily, Lifetime sees mostly newborn adoptions, so we'll get the opportunity to speak more to the hospital experience. Okay, everyone, this is Libby. If you are in the audience and you can hear me, will you just let me know, please? Okay, great. I don't know what just happened, but I think it was a little internet hiccup, and Kim and Linda are probably dialing back in. So, I'm going to let Linda and Kim know and find out where they're at. So thank you all for hanging in there with us. I'm so sorry about that delay. Okay, they're getting on here in just a second. So let's see here, and I love seeing the questions pouring in, so I'm just so grateful for all of you. Yes, we're still broadcasting, Ryan. Thank you for asking. Awesome. Okay, and Kim and Linda are joining us here in just a second. We had technical glitch, and
I'm back.
getting their audio restored. So there's Kim.
Talk about being in the hot seat.
I know.
All your breath just stops when something like that happens, which is rare.
When your phone goes blank and you realize nobody can hear you talking while you're still talking.
Wait a second here. Right. Okay, well, thank you all for your patience.
As Linda gets restored here, I know she's dialing back in too. Let me see where she's at. We had a great question as well as just talk about it. They talked about home studies, and Linda can probably get a little bit deeper on this, but it's, we talk a lot about the importance of having an updated home study, Kim, and that it's not just about getting ready to adopt. Linda, is that you with us?
I am. I just got back on.
Oh, great. Great timing. So one of the first steps to getting ready to adopt is the home study. So I thought this might be a good place to start, just so people know a little bit more what to expect, and then maybe we can kind of dive in more on a timeline, sort of talking about the questions that relate to the hospital, and then after you bring baby home and getting clearances, and then finalization. So this question that was typed in today says, does our home study have to be up to date through the adoption finalization or just through getting clearance with the interstate compact? So what's your experience with that, Linda? Does a family need to keep their home study current through the court date?
We like to see it through the court date. There are some states that will be okay with it through the placement of the child in the home, but many of the judges like to see the home study current through the post-placement supervisions. So what I mean by post-placement supervision is once a child is placed in your custody and is living at your home prior to the actual court finalization hearing, your home study writer or representative from your state will have to come to your home periodically to assess how the child is doing and thriving in your home. So depending on the state requirements, it could be only one visit or it could be 3 or 5 visits. It just depends on the state. So again, that's another
those are scheduled, correct?
question. They're always scheduled, yes.
That's a good question, because I know sometimes people who are used to foster care may be used to unscheduled visits.
That's true.
So that's a really good question to add in there. And I love that you talked about the different visits after, because that was definitely a question that we had, was how many times should I expect a visit from my home study provider after we bring baby home? And some people may not even know that that happens. And so what is it like at those visits when the social worker or the home study worker comes back after you have had a baby placed in your home?
This is a question for Linda.
Yes.
All of these are for Linda.
I actually do those visits in Florida, and basically we go in and we just review the records from the pediatrician to make sure that the baby is going to the pediatrician and being seen, and recording all of the progress that the baby is making in the home. That includes, if they're struggling with asthma, that they're getting treated for that, or, the baby's weight and how many times the baby is feeding and what kind of schedule the baby is on. And then we also take a peek around the home and also, kind of visualize and check the family to make sure that they're not overwhelmed or stressed. And if they are, that's okay, because that's a time for us to help them find a way to be less stressed by maybe engaging them with some kind of assistance or services or referrals for assistance, or, kind of, tricks of the trade to help them, kind of adapt to their new situation. So, and that all that information then is put into a report, and the report then is filed with the attorney that is filing the paperwork to create the petition for adoption. So they're called post-placement visit reports, are included with the petition for adoption that goes to the judge that reviews the case to finalize the adoption.
Interesting. So we had a great question that kind of chimes in with that. When an adoptive parent brings baby home, and then parenthood just swoops in and you're starting to care for this baby, what about families who have different plans for vaccination schedules? Does a home study visit afterwards, will it be an issue if, say, a family elects to delay vaccinations? I mean, are they looking at pediatric care to a certain standard, or are they just looking at, is this child getting appropriate pediatric care and well baby visits and checkups?
The second thing that you said. It is the family's choice, regarding the vaccinations and care of the baby. But the baby does need to have, the usual routine pediatric care and testing and evaluations to make sure that, the baby is thriving and healthy and receiving care. And so if you're going to a pediatrician and, the pediatrician reports are showing that, the baby is thriving and the parent is doing everything that they're supposed to do for the baby, then that's fine. That's what we record. There's no judgment on that, unless, the baby has, let's just say, well, I'll just use asthma as an example again, and the baby is not being treated properly for asthma, then that would be a concern. But if the family is following, all the requirements to treat the baby for asthma, then that's not a problem.
Excellent. So, and again, if you have questions today, we want to encourage you to sign in, because this helps everyone else too. It's just awesome to have these different thoughts, hypothetical situations, because you really can't be over-prepared when it comes to adopting. And it's even if you hear something today and then you go through your whole entire adoption and you think, yeah, that never happened for us, you still at least have to think about it and figure out, what would we do or what should we expect. So it's really great to see these questions. Kim, and I know we have some questions emailed too. I'm trying to get back to those here.
Yes. I was going to ask a question. If Linda could just kind of could you give us an overview of the timelines involved once the baby is born? Usually people want to know, well, how soon am I going to be able to leave the hospital with the baby, travel home with the baby, and when does finalization actually finish up? That kind of thing. What time frame can they expect in general?
Okay. Well, I might proceed that even a little bit earlier than at the hospital, just to start off with. Okay. So you may be working with a birth mom that lets you know at the last minute that she's going into labor. And you may be able to plan for it, and then sometimes you can't, and you just have to jump on planning ready and go. So what I encourage a lot of our families to do is just, prepare for that last second call, because you may get that last second call. But either way, if you get the last minute call, or if you're able to prepare when you get to the hospital, you can expect a couple of things. One is that the birth mom has the choice of how she wants the hospital stay to look. So that might be something that we do as social workers. We ask the birth mom, how she wants her hospital stay to be, and then we try to tell you so that you know what to expect. Sometimes the birth mom wants to see the baby right away and hold the baby and be with the baby for a few hours before you. And sometimes the birth mom will choose to not see the baby, and then you would see the baby first. And sometimes the birth mom wants to be the one to give you the baby. So what I encourage most of our families to be is flexible in the hospital, because it's an emotional circumstance for the birth mom as well as the adoptive family. Some hospitals, we always ask for a hospital to give an adoptive family a room so that you can experience the hospital stay as a birth mother would. In other words, there are a lot of things that the hospital teaches a parent after giving birth, and if in a situation, then they would go to the adoptive family to do those same tasks. So, they teach, about feedings, and they teach about formula, and they teach about how to hold a baby and how to wrap a baby, and all of those things is the responsibility of the hospital, so that when you leave the hospital with the baby, you have been, they have gone over their checklist of items for safety for the baby. So it's nice if you're able to have a room. Sometimes, there may not be room at the end because there may be too many babies born that day. So you might have to, you might prepare yourself for a situation where you have to have a, a hotel room stay because they don't, or, you can stay in the waiting room. But prepare yourself for that if you're unable to get a room at the hospital.
Well, I love what you said, and we've heard this in adoption stories too. It's just so true. We can't emphasize enough the importance of flexibility when it comes to those moments. Like you said, Linda, you could, it could go quickly either way. You could have already been matched for 3 months, and she could still go into labor unexpectedly.
Right.
These days, not everyone schedules their induction or a C-section, so you don't always know when she's going to go into labor, and you do have to be ready. But also, there are those times when you may not have ever heard of her before, and you get that call that she's ready for you now. So the flexibility there, but then also once you get there, because I've even worked with families where they've had no room like the first night, but then the next 2 nights things clear out a little and the hospital says, hey, you can stay with the baby here now. So don't be discouraged if you're hearing this and thinking, yes, that's what we want. That's what I hope happens. And then when it all comes down, they're telling you you need to stay in the motel across the street and come during visiting hours. Just respect that, be available, ask them how much you can participate. More and more hospitals, it seems like they're kind of coming around and they're understanding even the birth mother's desire to have you there, because that's also a vital time for her to see your interest and involvement with her and her child too. So again, I think accessibility is probably the huge buzzword there.
Yeah.
But that's something a woman in your role, Linda, someone who is supporting both sides, you're working through that match, that you're also able moment by moment to say, okay, well, here's what I think would benefit this situation right now, and I'll talk to so-and-so and see if they can give us some answers or figure out what to do next. And so it's important to work with someone and know that you're not just going in this by the seat of your pants and hoping it all comes out okay, but it's somebody that can actually help you kind of feel it out.
Right. There's another thing to consider. The hospitals usually release 2 wristbands. One always goes to the birth mom, and then the birth mom chooses who the other one goes to. So, we always encourage the birth mom to give it to, the adoptive mom. But sometimes she may want to give it to her own mother, and then and that doesn't mean that you can't see the baby. It just means that you can't be alone with the baby. So that might happen for the first couple hours, and then they'll turn the wristband over to you. But there are a lot of hospitals. Sometimes the smaller hospitals are a little easier, but there are a lot of hospitals that require you to have a wristband before you can spend alone time with the baby. So I want to point that out.
Yeah. Well, and that's because she may be there, and the baby's father may be involved. I mean, he might have one of the wristbands.
Yes. Yeah.
Or,
and some hospitals, give a concession, and they might, wind up giving a wristband to a family as well. But, we have had a lot of circumstances where the wristband was, a little bit of a, when you're in the moment and you're at the hospital and somebody is saying to you, you can't see the baby because you don't have a wristband, I think what I'm trying to say is just don't panic, because that will work out. And it may not work out in the first hour, but it always does work out. So that's something that, some people panic about. So I just wanted to bring that up, so that just don't panic. When you're at the hospital, if something doesn't seem like it's running very smoothly, it will. It just might take a little coordination to get it worked out. And there's a hospital social worker that is always involved, that is very helpful, that we work with too, especially when we're working in a state that we actually don't live in. We rely on the hospital social workers to be that, person for you, because we don't want you there alone experiencing.
Well, and that's a great
segue
too. So we've had a few questions come in asking. So there's a couple different angles to that. One is, once we get to the hospital, and now I want to preface this is under the conditions of a private open adoption. So the birth mother, even if she went last minute, she knows at least your names. She may have even already spoken to you on the phone. She knows you're coming, and you know her by name, and that it's still her hospital experience. I remember, Linda, it may have even been you, but we had even Adopted Mom talk recently just about, I had to remind myself, it's still her baby. It's still her hospital experience too. This isn't just about us showing up for this baby we've longed for. This is also this woman who just gave birth, and she's having a hospital experience with a baby that she gets very little time with in the scheme of things.
Right.
And so to be sensitive to that, but also wondering how, I'm getting some typing in the background.
And we can hear that typing in the background.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was muted.
There. So when we're talking about the type of adoption that we usually see at Lifetime, when a family gets to the hospital, what is generally just a good rule of thumb? I know every hospital is a little different, but is there someone specific that adoptive parents usually need to check in with? We had one person say, is there like a liaison or someone there to sort of facilitate our connection once we're there at the hospital?
Well,
or do you just go and visit this birth mother?
Well, no. Depending on the state, again, a lot of this is worked out with an attorney or an agency in that state. But the main thing is we connect with the hospital social worker, and then that hospital social worker will, meet with you and explain how that particular hospital works through the situation. That social worker will also explain what the birth mother has requested as far as what the hospital stay will look like for her, and explain all that to you. So you shouldn't ever feel like you're alone. We work closely with the hospital social workers, and there are times, there are hospitals that don't have social workers, and in those cases we work directly with the charge nurse at the time, or the nurse that is in charge of that particular birth mother at the time. So you will always have somebody that you can bounce things off of, as well as being able to communicate with us too. So like if there, if there's an issue, or if there's, a question that you have, we're always here and available. And if, you're unable to get the answer that you need from the hospital, then, we can certainly work it out too. So the point is, we don't want you to ever go into a situation where you feel like you're alone. So we try to prepare those situations that we know about in advance and build a rapport with the people at the hospital prior to. But in those circumstances that we have what we call a drop in the lap, when if there's a baby that's born and you're having to do something at the last minute, that's where I feel like the flexibility really needs to come into play, because there are a lot of details that need to be worked out in a short period of time, and it may seem confusing for a family when we're trying to get all that worked out at the last minute. But it always works out.
I brought up this picture here. This was from, I had one picture, it came to mind. These are just a couple of the nursing staff that were involved in one of our adoptions that happened recently with Lifetime. And I think sometimes adoptive parents get a little nervous, like they're showing up unwanted. But I always like to remind people that the hospitals are often excited about this. It's just you have to remember that the hospital's role is to keep the woman and her baby safe and secure, and to make sure that everything is on the up and up. But, you have to remember that the birth mother wants you there. She wouldn't have initiated this if she didn't want you to come and be there for her baby. And so the hospitals often, maybe you can speak to this, Linda. A lot of times they get excited just seeing something so amazing come together, especially through open adoption. More and more people, their eyes are opening to, wow, this is such a gentle and loving relationship connection that's started. And that they're not just there to look down on you or make things hard, but they actually want to make this easy for everyone involved.
And I agree with you on that. And I can tell you that more and more, I see the hospital workers, sharing their joy for the situation, especially, if there is a rapport that is built between the family and the birth mother, and that there's a respect for the birth mother. In the past, I've seen situations where there wasn't a whole lot of respect for the birth mother. And, it was just kind of very impersonal, but it's not that way anymore. And especially when, like if you walk into a situation and you kind of feel like you have, a nurse that may be just very matter-of-fact, not cold, but just doing her job, usually by the end of the whole process at the hospital, they've just warmed up to the whole thing, and you just see when you're leaving, they're just so joyous about the whole situation. Mm-hmm. So it's a difficult situation that can be very pleasant, and if everybody has mutual respect and understanding for each other.
Yes, that's another great tip.
And if you put yourselves, if everybody puts themselves in the other person's shoes, like this is so hard for a birth mom, if you put yourself in her shoes and feel what she's going through, your compassion will show through, and she will be calmer knowing that you understand that, and that you're willing to be open about it. And at the same time, sometimes we're telling a birth mom, it's especially one who is trying to hang on to her baby for just a little bit longer. This is emotional for a family too, and they're excited to be a new family. So sometimes we have birth moms that we're having to say, put yourself in their shoes. You've engaged this family, and they're excited to see the baby, and then they warm up, and before you know it, it has never been an unpleasant situation that I have seen through an open adoption process. It always is a nice, warm, pleasant experience at the hospital. Maybe sometimes, a little bit, sometimes tedious. And when I say that, one of the things to expect in the hospital is that a lot of, the legal paperwork for the birth mom gets done at the hospital, which seems unpleasant. you know, it's kind of one of those things where you think, couldn't this have been taken care of at a different time because this is such an emotional moment? But the law states that the birth mom can't sign her consent for an adoption until after the baby is born and before she leaves the hospital, because the baby will leave the hospital with the family.
Too. Right.
So
I always tell birth mothers, and actually I always warn adoptive parents too, if anyone's ever telling you, oh, she can sign her rights while she's pregnant, I usually tell them to hang up the phone, because it's just really not a fair practice to assume that a woman's going to commit this child before she's had a chance to even say hello or goodbye. And it's healthier for her to realize, my baby is here, I still want to do this, these people are amazing, I think this is the best decision, rather than to feel like it's too late, I've had my baby but I signed 2 months ago, and to just feel so torn up. But I couldn't imagine putting a woman through that. But the law is that she needs to wait. But like you were saying, what came to mind for me is I know there are some states and even some hospitals that want to be totally hands-off from that paperwork. So maybe under some circumstances where the attorney has already prepared everyone to know that she's going to give birth, and then when she's discharged, we're all going to go meet at, you know, Denny's or some coffee shop or the mall food court or somewhere where we can sit down and go through this together. Or, you know, maybe they go to the attorney's office or even to birth mother's home. So sometimes, like you said, Linda, I love that you brought that up, because it does seem like, well, this is kind of sensitive time and we're having to do paperwork. But everyone's usually prepared for that, because by the time they get there, they usually understand this is the process to expect. These are the steps to complete this adoption.
Right.
So she won't be totally shocked, but if the hospital won't allow that, or if the state law says that she needs to wait, say, 5 days after birth before she can sign anything, you know, chances are she's going to be discharged before 5 days. So then they coordinate a meeting outside of the hospital. But again, all of this is a great time to ask the question, when do we involve an attorney in the match?
Well, the attorney is usually involved within 3 days of match. So, and the reason for that is because there is some paperwork and there are some issues that need to be dealt with prior to the baby being born. One of the things would be finding the birth father, because the birth father has to sign and is able to sign the paperwork prior to the birth of the child. There also may be birth mom expenses that the attorney will be working through during that particular period of time. So it is important to engage an attorney as soon as possible after the match occurs. And that's it.
So, yeah. And, you know, really, too, if you don't have an attorney involved because it's such a last-minute situation and it maybe happens on a holiday weekend, it's not to say that you can't move forward. We had a great question here, and I know the answer, but I want to speak from your experience. We're trying to resolve the background noise there, too, so that we can hear. We had a great question that said, so if she's required to sign once she leaves the hospital, after she leaves the hospital, how do they release the baby to the adoptive parents? And I know that the answer to that can vary a little bit state to state, but generally speaking, can you talk about how the hospital's paperwork is different than the attorney's paperwork?
I'm just trying to think of that scenario because honestly I haven't had a scenario.
Okay. So, well, I know that your experience is more with like the type of adoptions. Because of the way Lifetime serves all the states in the U.S., you know, we have different people to work with the different states because some state laws require certain procedures while others require different ones. So like I know in California there's a form called the AD22, and essentially what it is it releases the baby to someone other than the mother, which could be the same form that they use, say, if mother had childbirth
like
complications.
a custody.
Yeah,
or
and
like
she
a
had to stay
guardianship
longer than the
document.
baby was there. Yes, exactly.
Right.
But it's not the same as her signing her rights over, but it will allow the family, the adopted parents, to leave the hospital with the baby. Because the mother will put your names saying, I allow, you know, Joe and Jane Smith to leave the hospital with my baby. But then she's still going to coordinate with an attorney later to make sure all of those paperwork are completed so that the adoption continues forward. So it's sort of a two-step thing in some cases. But more and more these days, I think the attorney is getting involved even sooner when the hospital allows.
I have had a circumstance where we had a baby that was in the neonatal unit, and the family, the birth mom, had the family sign a power of attorney so they could make decisions about the baby. So there are ways, and the attorney, whoever the attorney is in whatever state, will have the knowledge for each state's particular nuances about those kind of issues. So a lot of times that's what we do, is we go back to whomever the attorney is to ask those questions for that state, because not only does each state have their own procedures to follow, but those same procedures change often. So just about the time that you get used to something, it might change. And so that's why we leave it to the attorneys to give us the guidance for each particular state.
So let's see here. I would love maybe to get a picture of, so they've left the hospital, maybe birth mother's even signed already, and now they're just getting ready to go home. We had a great question come in that said, so if I live in the same state where my baby's born, do I have to stay in the city where my baby's born, or can I go back home?
Well, it depends on the state again. Some states will allow you to go right home, and then some states might require, if it's outside of the state, there are some Icpc requirements, which is interstate compact requirements, meaning that each state has to provide permission for the baby to move out of one state and for the other state to accept the baby. And some states actually have that internally, and that's called OTI, if you move from county to county. But it really depends on the state whether or not that would apply. So again, that's a good question, and it's hard to answer because it depends on the state. So
yeah.
So
well, and again, I think it speaks to the point that some of this information will become more clear when you are matched. Just like how we say, you know, wait to get an attorney until you are matched. Because if you called an attorney today and you don't even have a prospect on the table yet, they're going to say, okay, well, call me when you know who she is, because there's not anything for them to do. There's no guidance, there's no answers for them to provide yet. And so you'll know so much more. And in an average situation, when you're matched, Lifetime would prepare you for what to expect. The attorney will prepare you for what to expect. So you'll have even more clarity going into the situation. You won't feel so much like, oh my gosh, how are we going to navigate this? On average, what length of time are people when they're adopting out of state and that they know that they have to get clearances to go back home? On average, how long do people usually wait to travel back to their home state?
I've seen it be as short as 3 days, and I've seen it go to as many as 10 days. And it may have, somebody may have experienced a longer time period than that, but I've been doing this for a long time, and I really haven't experienced that long period of time unless it's a foster care situation. But basically what happens is when you're going state to state, when the baby is released from the hospital, usually after a couple of days, in order for the attorney to make application to the state that you would be leaving, they need to have the baby's birth and delivery records, the discharge records, your home study, and certain other signatures. Your consent to take custody of the baby, the birth mom's consent to provide an adoption plan for her baby. So all of those documents can't even be prepared in advance because the last thing that they need is the baby's discharge paperwork and physical. So once all of that information is gathered together by the attorney, then the attorney will immediately send it to the Icpc office, which is usually in the state capital of where you are. That group of people then reviews that documentation, and they sign off on allowing the baby to leave the state because all of the proper documents and information has been provided to the state for them to make that decision. Once that state gives approval, then they send it to your home state where you're going to bring the baby. And then they review the same packet of information, and they want to see the baby's birth and delivery records and health records and all of that because they want to know that what they're accepting into the state. And, it may take a day for them to approve it too. So it really depends on like what day of the week it falls, how many people are working, how many requests have been made that day. So and sometimes it may take a little bit longer if there's a child that was born and that has special needs, that was in the neonatal unit, and there may be some complications. So the receiving state will then want to know as much information about the baby as possible before they accept the baby into the state. But I've never really seen it more than 10 days, and it's usually somewhere between 3 and 5 days.
I know sometimes what happens is, if there's a weekend or a holiday that falls in there, it can delay things. There may be other things that come up, and again, the flexibility is key. It doesn't always mean that your adoption is going to stop moving forward, but that,
right.
A good example is, well, let's see, we had Ryan and Laura's story here. I know I have a picture of them in this little slideshow here. Let's bring that back up. And now their story, which we hosted a few months ago, they actually had a much longer than average time away from home. And that was due to circumstances outside of their control, which was that the birth mother wasn't ready to sign yet. It wasn't that she didn't want to move forward, but she was just having a hard time, and she just kind of needed her downtime, and they couldn't force her. But it was just more her timing. That's very unusual, but sometimes there's little things that can come up, like a long weekend. Like we just had a 3-day weekend for most attorneys, and then certainly if you're butting holidays next to each other, or if your attorney ends up in court one day and can't get to your paperwork until the next day or something. Sometimes there's just little things that you just kind of got to breathe through. I always like to remind families, just try and enjoy this time. I know you're anxious to get home to your pretty nursery and have your baby meet your friends and your family and get into a new routine. But I love when adoptive parents talk about how they embraced that time away from home to bond as a family, because essentially this is the first time you're getting to bond with this baby. You haven't been pregnant with that baby for 9 months. You haven't been knowing about that baby even for 9 months. So taking the time to just enjoy it as much as you can. Some great tips, and I think probably we need to host another webinar just about traveling for adoption. But, we had one family that said, well, so if we can't stay in the hospital, what do you suggest? And, I mean, you might want to stay in a hotel, and then when the baby's discharged, find an extended stay type place, or maybe even look online for a good deal for a house rental in the area or something like that, like a vacation rental that's temporary stay. There's all kinds of different solutions. You don't necessarily have to figure out today, but you can make it work. It doesn't have to be that you're in a in a tiny hotel room with one sink, and you're thinking, how am I going to wash bottles and keep onesies clean and everything. You can find somewhere that you can kind of set up camp temporarily until you can go home and really use that time to just bond as a family, because this is the beginning of your story. The other side of this, which we hear so often in adoption stories, is how, remember, it's open adoption. Chances are good that you probably in those couple days at the hospital really started to care about your baby's birth mother, and you may even want to get together with her again before you travel home. And so I always think of waiting to go home as an opportunity to really add some meaningful foundation to that connection you started with your child's birth mother, if she's comfortable, if she's available. Find out where her favorite restaurant is in town, and maybe make a note in the baby book, like, your tummy mommy loved Mexican food and took us to this little dive that she and her mom go to all the time. So it doesn't have to be that you're just watching for emails and paperwork and phone calls to come through. It can actually be a really personal experience that you'll never get back again, that you can really make the most out of.
I like that. I like what you're saying, because that is so true. The other piece of that is, try not to be anxious about, how long it takes, or, whatever, because and try not to worry, because it will happen. Even if you have a scenario, which we've got going on right now, where a state is not accepting receiving a baby into the state, it will happen. If a state says no, they're saying it because they're missing a document, or they need, some other piece of explanation before they accept the baby into the state. I have never seen it happen where they don't accept it. It just,
right.
So try not to worry about that, and let the professionals, let your attorney deal with that, and just don't worry about it. Just try to embrace the time. Like Libby was saying, that's a great idea. And we do often see birth moms and families get together before they leave, just for like a final little visit, or they'll go to lunch, or they'll buy a gift for each other. Like sometimes the moms will have like matching bracelets, or some little token that they want to share with each other. And those days will, if you do it that way, the days will go by quickly. But if you're just sitting there waiting, and tapping your foot because you can't, wait to get home, you're just going to make yourself anxious, and you're not going to enjoy what you should be enjoying.
Exactly. Because even just you saying that, I hope that people sort of take a deep breath and just exhale, because it's so easy to get overwhelmed. You hear stories. You see the media. The media always talks about these crazy adoption stories. And in reality, it's just, to you it's exciting, but to other people they'll think, oh, that's it? Like, you just kind of chilled out for a few days and then you have to come home? It doesn't have to be full of drama and chaos. It really is, you have this baby and you're settling in. Even if you're parents already, it's still good to remember we don't know this baby yet. And so you can take that opportunity. But I always love, Linda, and you have had feedback even recently, but I love when birth mothers speak to the things that they learned about the adopted parents just in that short window of time when they were in her hometown, in her area where she gave birth, and the comfort it brought her just to see how excited Dad was with baby, or the way that they treated her, like you said earlier, with the respect, honoring her, being there for her as much as the baby. It all it all plays out. But I know that sometimes it can get overwhelming because then you're thinking all those logistics too. And I think the important thing that you pointed out, which I loved, was there are other people keeping track of that. So it's okay to be like, hey, I did my part. The ball is in Linda's court right now, or the ball is in my attorney's court right now, or the ball is in the state capitol's court right now because they're getting our clearance. Like that you can say, okay, I did my part. I'm back in my moment here with my baby, and that you're not, your stomach's not knots, constantly thinking about how can I control this, how can I make this happen, that you're just responding and doing what's needed. That, I think, goes back to where we started today, which was why it's so vital to have that home study updated too, because if there's any question with that, that will definitely prolong your experience when you're away from home, and then even your experience possibly to finalize, which I would love to move on to as we wrap up today to talk about. We don't often get to talk about this a lot, but what should adoptive parents prepare for? So they bring baby home, they're starting to have those post-adoption visits with home study worker, and now they're looking at finalizing adoption. What should they prepare for in court? What paperwork do they need to bring? What is that experience typically like for adoptive parents when they're going to finalize their baby's adoption?
It is all up to the attorney. Go home and enjoy your baby and just be there for the post-placement visits, because the rest of it is really the attorney filing all the paperwork that has already been done. So you will be in another situation like hurry up and wait, and you could choose to be anxious about it until the adoption finalizes, which could take, depending on the state, could take 1 day, it could take a year. Or you could just go on about your life and just, you know, enjoy how things are going and enjoy your family, and then, you know, at some point the attorney will call you and say, we have a finalization date, and then you have that date set. But sometimes it takes a while to get that date, and just don't worry about it. It's the attorney's job to get that taken care of. That's what you're paying your attorney for. So, you know, just let them deal with it and just enjoy your life. You have your baby at home, and you're making yourself, you know, your family now, and you're adjusting to new things. That's one of the things that you don't have to worry about.
Mm-hmm. We had a great question. So while you're waiting for adoption to finalize, and this ties in with another very, very common question that we usually hear on practically every webinar. So I'll kind of ask them both at the same time. This one was great because it's a little bit more specific to just living life. But she said, during that time that you're waiting for it to be finalized, is it okay to do things like a baptism?
Oh, absolutely. We just had one, actually. Yeah, you can.
I know that one of the concerns that we hear a lot is, so while we're waiting for it to be finalized, does that mean that the first parents can come back and upset the adoption? And we're always trying to reassure people, you know, that window is usually already closed by the time you're finalizing. Finalizing is more about, and maybe you can speak to this because people have questions about the birth certificate. So finalizing is just more about, now this child's birth certificate name will change. That this is about, once the adoption is finalized, you can claim this adoption on your taxes. I mean, all of this stuff. But that the finalization is not the moment that the birth mother can't change her mind anymore. That window closed long before finalization.
Oh, yes. Yes. There is a time limit for birth mom to be able to change her mind. In certain states, it's, you know, upon signing. And then in other states, it can be 30 days. There's a couple of states that have a 30-day waiting time. You know, that's probably the hardest time, you know, is kind of, you know, waiting through that period, especially if you're, you know, working with a birth mom that was kind of shaky, because, you know, that does happen. But once that, we call that the irrevocable consent period. Once it becomes irrevocable, then you're okay, you know, as far as birth mom changing her mind. In Florida, it's, upon signing, but I think it's Pennsylvania, it's 30 days. In Georgia, it's 10 days. So it really just depends on what state you're matched in.
And I love, we have to clarify, it really depends. Sometimes even county to county, the adoption laws can vary. And again, we're speaking more to the type of adoptions that Lifetime usually sees too. So if you're involved in a private adoption not with us, or if you're working with the state on maybe a foster adoption situation, or if you're thinking about international adoption, some of these answers will probably vary. So it's so important to have these questions, but also make sure that when you're choosing the specific type of adoption you're going to pursue, that you're getting answers from the people who are familiar with that too. Because all of that could shift a little bit. But what I love hearing about this is just, I hope that it gets people excited thinking this is going to happen. Because what we see happening is matches are happening all the time. We're seeing families that are going to meet their babies, and I know that they get so nervous. A lot of times people, especially when they don't yet understand open adoption, they get so nervous thinking maybe open adoption makes it easier for her to change her mind or makes it harder for her to go through with adoption. But maybe through the photos that we pulled up today or just hearing Linda's answers reassure you that the process is to benefit all involved. It's not just to walk you through this gauntlet of risk. This is really about everyone being prepared for what's ahead. When women call Lifetime to explore adoption, they're talking to members of Lifetime's team like Linda, and we're telling her, before she's even chosen to do adoption or not, we're talking about what the process will be like for her to go through adoption, and she can decide, do I want to move forward with that? Do I want to keep taking steps to make that happen? So it's not like she's completely caught off guard that you show up at the hospital and you want to hold her baby. She typically wants that to happen. So
that's true.
Start learning about open adoption so that you can understand how it's actually there to benefit both sides and also the baby. And also because it comforts, like Linda said earlier, it actually brings comfort to the hospital knowing that you do have a regard and a respect and a love for this child's mother, and that it's not just about your desire to bring a baby home, kind of thing. So just keep asking these questions. And then again, you just remember your situation may be unique compared to people in other states or other counties, and that's really what we're here for too. So if you're already working with Lifetime, just remember, if you need any clarity about how to better prepare for what's ahead with respect to your state or your circumstances or a match that you're already involved in, reach out to your coordinator and get those answers. Go back and listen to some past webinars or listen to other adoption stories, because sometimes that helps bring some clarity too. But also, if you aren't yet working with Lifetime and you need to talk with someone about where you live or what to expect with your adoption goals, just remember that applying is the best first step so that we can learn more about what you're looking for and if we can meet those needs and those goals in the best way possible for your future family. You can always write to us, adopt@lifetimeadoption.com, or any of you can call 1-800-923-6784. And that's really what we're about here at Lifetime, is that every match, Linda, you're probably shaking your head thinking yes. Every match is handled as if it's the first match ever. We can't just assume that one match is going to go exactly like the next match, even if people live in the same exact areas. So they're all handled personally, one-on-one. It's not, oh, it's a Florida-Texas match. It'll go exactly like this. That we still know that we're working with people and different professionals, different timing. It's a whole other story if your baby's born premature and needs to stay in the hospital much longer than the mother does, or much longer than you planned on being at state. So there's all kinds of variables that can come into play. But I hope what you're leaving here today with is knowing that you're not alone, flexibility is key, and that all of it can be a very positive experience, even if it feels a little nerve-wracking, even if it feels a little bit uncertain because it's moment by moment. It can all be something you look back and think, I'm so glad it went that way. So as we wrap up today, Linda, is there anything you want to leave us with today, or anything that anything else you want to make sure that we share with the adoptive parents who are listening?
Well, the only thing that I just want to stress, and we talked about it before, is just to make sure that you keep yourself flexible and open-minded, because every adoption is different, and there may be a little bump in the road and there may not be, but just prepare yourself that if there's a little bump in the road, we'll get through it, and that there's always somebody there that will help you through it, and that you should never feel alone. So if you keep those, things in mind, you'll have a better experience, because then your focus should always be on, once the baby is born, focus on the baby, and let the professionals do what they need to do to move you forward. And if they need something from you, they will let you know. So you don't have to worry with it and, and be concerned about what's being done or what's not being done. Because there are things going on in the background while you're there enjoying your baby.
Thank you. I love that you brought that up, because that really is the reason that you are trusting the professionals you're engaging in the processes, because you know that you need them, but you're also trusting them to take care of what's needed so that you can be the parents and just you essentially the adoptive parents get the fun side of things. So just enjoy it. And if you have questions, or if you're working with a professional that you're not sure is taking care of things, then you need to be honest and speak with them about that. But also, from beginning to end, I really do believe what Marty often says, which is for every family who truly wants to adopt and they're doing everything that they can, there is a baby. You will adopt. So just keep doing what you can, and just keep exploring that and learning as much as possible. So, Linda, I'm grateful to have you here. We keep having some comments that come in. I saw a couple emails just saying how grateful they are that we even answered questions they didn't know they had. So this was really good to talk about. And I hope it gets all of you excited to just think about, the end result. You're bringing a baby home. Adoption is about bringing a baby home. So I hope that today's webinar was helpful. If you have any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear from you. You can write to me personally at Libby, Libby, at lifetimeadoption.com. And again, if you ever need to talk with us one-on-one, our phone number is 1-800-923-6784. We hope you all have a great afternoon, and we will talk with you soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.